From the dawn of automobile racing, man has been awed by the raw horsepower displayed by fast race cars. Taking the intricate parts that make up an engine, making them reach their potential without sacrificing durability, is an art. Waddell Wilson is one of those few who have achieved unimaginable success under the hood. Join us as we take a look at the remarkable career of Waddell Wilson on Men Behind the Wrenches. The life of an engine builder is not for the faint-hearted. You're always under constant pressure to tweak the engine to the edge, to find more horsepower, and God forbid if a part fails. For over 30 years, one man carried the burden for many of the sport's top stars. If you had a Waddell Wilson motor under your hood, chances were you'd be a contender. Hello everyone, I'm Geoff Hammond and welcome to Men Behind the Wrenches. Like so many before him, it was Waddell's failed attempt behind the wheel that led him to a career under the hood. Waddell Wilson grew up in the mountains of North Carolina, and during high school fell in love with fast cars, rooting for names like Fireball Roberts, Junior Johnson, and Ned Jarrett. After graduating from Nashville Auto Diesel College, Waddell lived a short time in Miami. It was there he built a race car and won some races from behind the wheel. Halfway through the 1959 season, a scary crash in a sportsman race cost Waddell his car. Not having enough money to fix it, he decided to go back and work on cars instead. He moved back to North Carolina and in 1963 ended up at the shops of Holman Moody.
So I went by and talked to Howard Dehart, which was the general manager, and he said he wasn't hiring anyone. So I started out the door, wasn't disappointed because I wasn't figuring I was going to get a job anyway. So I run in John Holman. He asked me what I was doing. I said, well, I was looking for employment. So he said, well, step in my office. So then he asked me, he said, well, when can you start work? That was right before noon, and he was ready for me to go to work that afternoon. I had no idea what I was getting into at the time. A normal day was from 8 in the morning till 10 at night. Started out at $1.50 an hour. Then they put me in the engine room, and I always built the engines for the Holman Moody car. Whoever was running out of the shop, that's who I built engines for.
Holman Moody was the place to be in NASCAR for that era. Names like Fred Lorenzen, David Pearson, and Wilson's childhood favorite, Fireball Roberts, piloted their cars.
When I went to work at Holman Moody, there was only 30-some people employed, and that included the people in the office. And the reputation that they had was unbelievable at that time. You know, they was on top of the hill. I mean, they had, at that time, Lorenzen and Fireball driving the race cars, and, you know, they were both, you know, could win on every given weekend. And they assigned me to Fireball's car, and I remember, to start with, you know, I think, you know, I don't know if I want to do this, because I had enough pressure building engines and worry about that. And we had tryouts, and normally you know, when they'd have the tryouts, whether it was changing tires, jacking or whatever, I was able to win the competition. There were only 6 of us in the engine room, and we built the engine for all the Mercury and Ford teams. And not only that, we went to the racetrack and took care of the race car, helped with it, and pitted the race car.
For 10 years, Holman Moody worked very closely with Ford Motor Company. This gave Waddell an opportunity to learn from the great minds of the time and figure out ways to find and harness horsepower. During this period, they would amass an amazing 93 victories. Those wins included 2 Daytona 500s for Fireball Roberts and Fred Lorenzen in cars built by Waddell, and 2 championships with David Pearson in 1968 and 1969 using Waddell's engines. Wilson was now a well-rounded mechanic, and it was a huge part of this organization's success.
Probably, you know, close to all the tests that was done, I was involved with them somewhere or other. And you know, we'd go to California and we'd test out there for maybe a week or whatever. And in Daytona, we'd test a week or 2 in Daytona before the races. And, you know, we had all the Ford engineers would be involved.
Unbeknownst to Waddell, his education at Holman Moody was nearing an end as the organization faced some upheaval. By 1972, the Holman Moody magic was ending as Ralph Moody departed the organization. Waddell decided it was time for a change also. In 1973, he took his engine building skills to LG DeWitt's operation and helped Benny Parsons win his Winston Cup championship.
Well, we won the championship with him in '73, which was a good year. We still had the big block.
It was a David slaying Goliath. I mean, here's this little operation from Ellerby, North Carolina with 4 or 5 guys winning a championship over a Petty Enterprises or a Junior Johnson. It was a phenomenal thing that took place that day. And I'm sure the teams looked, how'd he do that?
Financing became tight for LG Dewitt in 1975, but that didn't stop the team from stunning the field at the Daytona 500.
Well, you know, that was in 75, and in 74 is when we switched to small blocks. And, you know, engines blew up right and left. I mean, we didn't have the parts and pieces to work with. You know, there wasn't much more than the parts that to run the streetcar that we was working with on those race engines. And I remember when we won the race in Daytona in 75. Now, you talking about winning a race that we should never have won was that race. I mean, the things that went on prior to that race, I mean, there was no way we were supposed to win that race.
3 years later, Harry Ranier hired Waddell and instantly promoted him to crew chief. Through those years, Wilson earned a reputation for being demanding and hardworking. His cars would run the distance and be fast. That appealed to names like Buddy Baker, Bobby Allison, and Cale Yarborough, who would pass through this organization.
When he brought the carburetor out, after the engine was in, everything, the doors would come open, 3 people following Waddell carrying the carburetor. He'd put it on, he would tighten it up, he would do everything himself. I mean, it was a ritual. And I thought, God, you know, and we'd say, well, the Grand Poobah's coming. And then we go to the racetrack, and boy, it wasn't funny then. Great race cars, great power.
He wanted his stuff mentally perfect. Physically, I don't know if it made a lot of difference, but mentally, he wanted everything perfect.
Waddell's power was about to take him to the pinnacle of his sport. Wilson's career was just about to hit its stride. With Buddy Baker behind the wheel, the car would win the 1980 Daytona 500.
That guy could wring more power out of an engine than anybody else. The stuff that he built for Buddy Baker, and that was some incredible combination, because Baker's leg was always in it. I mean, right through the floorboard.
Because his style was my style. You know, he was flat out. Buddy was an interesting character. I mean, he'd go with us to the racetrack. He rode in the van with us. We'd go together. We'd get up for morning and go to breakfast. He'd be with us. I mean, he went, every track we made, he made with us. And you get the car right, and I mean, you could look out, because you know, you knew that if you could keep him going and keep him pointed in the right direction, he was going to win a race. The 80 race was a tough winter. Getting ready to go to Daytona, we had the Oldsmobile. And I remember in the shop, there's only 3 of us working on the race car and building the engine. So I can remember working on those engines at night, and the 2 men that worked with me, they had to go home at 5 o'clock. So I'd stay on and work. And I can remember going through the holidays, and I said, you know, I'm the only human being in NASCAR that's working. So when we showed up to Daytona, we went through Templestone, everything passed, and we hit the racetrack, and the car was fast.
There was nobody there that could touch that race car. I don't care. They could have got a running start. They couldn't have caught it.
It was a fast pace that day, because it was a cool, brisk, and they run all the way down to the last part of the last couple laps without a caution. And the last pit stop, I remember Buddy come in, he was leading the race, Bobby's running second. When Buddy came down pit road, Bobby came down at the same time we did. So when we stopped, I'm telling myself, I said, there ain't no way he's gonna wait on us to get a can of gas, because we had to get 1 can of gas in that race car to finish the race. And that was all we needed, was 1 can, but we had to get that can in. And I knew at that time, you know, we'd always see how quick at the shop it'd take to dump a can of gas. And it took 6 seconds or a little bit of time you hooked up. So Big Buck Brigance was gassing the race car. And so as soon as he hooked up, I started counting. But at the same time, you know, I'm trying to figure out how am I going to keep Buddy in here for 6 seconds.
He actually jumped in the window and grabbed hold of me and timed how long it was going to take. You know, that was a 6-second stop. But he knew me at that time. I was like a runaway horse, man. All I wanted was out of there.
I was holding on for dear life, trying to let him know that I didn't want him to leave until we got, and I was counting 1,001, 1,002, and I could hear the engine rev start up on it, and I said, he's gonna drop the clutch on this thing. And I got to about 1,004, and he dropped the clutch. But when he did, he was taking me down pit road with him, and I finally got my arm out of the window net, and I looked around, and here come Buck and that gas can. and it was some more collision out there on pit roads. The pit stop was so quick. I mean, when we went back on the racetrack, we had a 9-second lead. But at the same time, we didn't get all the gas out of the can.
Did we get enough fuel? That was still in the back of my mind. So I dropped down to the flat part of the racetrack to make sure that, you know, that it picked up all the fuel.
And so Buddy'd go by and I'd tell Buddy, you know, you got a 9-second lead, so slow down, slow down. And I'll never forget, he'd come out of start-finish line, he'd come back on the radio and he'd say, Waddell, I can't hear you. And I knew then, though, he was running as hard as he could, and that was just his style of driving. You know, it was wide open or nothing. So it come down 2 laps ago, and there was a caution, and I think that saved us. And it was good, Lord willing, that we was going to win that race that day, because we should have run out of gas. And I think that record, maybe it still stands today, the fastest 500 miles or close to it.
There's certain mountains that you have to climb. And Daytona 500, my friends, the biggest mountain you'll ever climb.
Waddell has succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, but as an engine guy, he yearned for the ultimate, more power. In 1982, Waddell would be reunited with Benny Parsons. During qualifying in Talladega that year, Benny would be the first driver to break 200 miles an hour. Ironically, Waddell had just left the track and didn't witness the feat firsthand.
Well, at that time we had the Pontiac Le Mans, and it was a very good streamlined race car. And we'd already worked on it the year before when Bobby was driving the car. And when we showed up at Talladega, you know, it was in the back of my mind hoping to be the first one, but I didn't think we'd be able to be the one that would accomplish it, because I knew how hard other people strive and do the same thing. But I'd always put a lot of effort in building the engines, because, you know, there wasn't that many people working on a race car at that time. And we'd work, you know, through the night I would, working on the engines, trying to get all the horsepower I could. And not only did I work on the engines, the carburation, and, you know, all the parts of the engine I worked on. And, you know, when we showed up at Talladega, I knew we had a good car, but I didn't feel like it was that good. What made it come to reality was whenever I went over to get some passes over at the press box for the boys. You know, their wives was coming in that weekend, they wanted passes. So I went over to talk to them, and that was over at the museum where I had to go, there at Talladega, and they was, you know, they were jumping up and down, and I never seen the people. I didn't know what was going on. And they said, man, don't you realize what you have done today? He said, you have made history. And not only that, I mean, the phones are ringing off the hook, and we just can't get enough tickets sold now. I said, you know, everybody wants to come to Talladega now that we broke 200 mile an hour. That was when it set in as, you know, I guess we have done something quite spectacular.
Waddell was in those days was probably the sharpest man in the business.
At Speed Weeks a year later, Waddell built a car and an engine that sent Cale Yarborough over the 200 mile an hour qualifying mark, but the number didn't stand because lap 2 was a disaster.
That whole day of practice, I mean, we wasn't even close to 200 mile an hour, and I couldn't understand why the car wouldn't run any faster.
I'll have to take some of the blame for what happened. I figured it was going to be close, so right before I got in the car to go qualify, we didn't run much spoiler back then anyway. We laid the spoilers pretty well flat out, and I walked by the back of that thing, and I was thinking about that 200 mile an hour lap, so I beat that spoiler down just a little bit more. And had I not done that, we'd have probably been in pretty good shape.
He said, well, we're okay. And I couldn't understand, you know, what he was trying to tell me, because, you know, I was just frustrated because we weren't even running close to 200 mile an hour.
The first lap was a good lap, but it was a hairy lap. I knew that I was on the ragged edge. Then all of a sudden, I felt it getting light.
So the first lap around, he ran like a 44.70, and I was tickled to death. That, you know, was over 200 mile an hour. So the guys up in the tower was checking the intervals around the racetrack, and they said when he went down the backstretch, they were jumping up and down hollering because he broke 200 now at Daytona. And they said, one guy that was timing the car said, well, you think that's something? Said, if he makes around this time, it's going to be close to 203 mile an hour.
You know, when they announced the 200-mile-an-hour lap, the crowd just went wild, and I had all these chill bumps, and then they went into a big roar again, and he wasn't back in sight.
He hit the flat of the racetrack, and it de-wedged the race car, and it come around on him. And it ended up over in turn 4, but it's back on its wheels. Dick Bates took me over in the infield care center. They had Cale in there. He was on the table, and they had topped his uniform down and looking at him. And when I walked in, he said, "Well, you done everything right but one thing." I said, "Dang, what did I do wrong?" Cale said, "Well, you didn't put the controls in so I could fly it." That was one of the highest moments of my life to the one of the lowest in seconds.
Cale went on to win the 500, Waddell's 4th career victory in the coveted race.
I know other races we've won, and with Cale too, that was meant as much as that one. But now that one, you can't never say that didn't mean a lot, because that was, to be able to do that, and nobody figured that we'd be able to come back and win with a car that was old and, wasn't near the car that we'd wrecked. So to be able to come back and pull it off was fantastic.
That was a very important win, mainly because of what led up to it. The anticipation that we were going to Daytona and try to set that 200-mile-an-hour record, and then come out and win the race. It was a great win for me.
Waddell and Cale would repeat at the Daytona 500 in 1984 in dominant fashion. At the end of 1986, Waddell would leave Ranier to take an offer from Rick Hendrick to work with his close friend Darrell Waltrip. Instantly, PR Spin dubbed the duo the Dream Team, but it turned out to be anything but.
Well, fanfare is one thing. Fanfare doesn't get the car around the track. I really don't know. A lot of times, and very much in this sport, it's personalities, and I don't think they had worked together a lot before, and I guess it just didn't click quite like they thought it was going to.
Being with Cale and Bobby and Buddy, and then coming along with Darrell, and that was a 180. And, that was a different situation altogether, and that was too hard for me to adjust to, and it didn't turn out well. We're great friends this day, but it was hard for us to work together, because my train of thought and his was different. It turned out from going to a dream team to just a total disaster, I guess.
I don't think Waddell ever really wanted to be a crew chief. I mean, he did it, but his love was the motor.
Out of all the things I've done in racing, that's probably the most disappointing time of my life. I left Harry Ranier and the men that went with me over to Rick Hendrick's, and we was looking so, forward to getting that going, and we put a lot of effort into it. And, and then to see it not work out like we had planned and dreamed it would.
Waddell and DW were able to salvage their friendship, but Waddell moved on to be Jeffrey Bodine's crew chief the following year. Eventually, he would end up as head of research and development at Hendrick Motorsports. Only a couple of years later, that organization would achieve success that rivals any sports dynasty.
I didn't feel like I was any better than anyone else when I was building engines. I was always a perfectionist, and I want, good enough wasn't good enough for me. I remember time and time again getting ready to go to Daytona for the Daytona 500 and building an engine 5 times. And most people, first time off the dyno, they said, "Well, it's okay." But it never was okay to me. If I had another day or another hour to work on it, I would try to do that. But I tried to not just work on one part of the engine, I tried to work on every part of it.
He was very focused, very, very focused on the job at hand, and kept trying something. Every engine was different. He never made 2 of the same kind. Every engine was a little bit different, because he kept trying this and that, trying to find more power. It was unbelievable how every engine had a different camshaft, how much time he spent on the telephone talking to piston manufacturers and cam grinders and all these things, because he kept trying to make more and more power.
He was a person that I highly respected. I learned from him. Probably wish he hadn't taught me as much as he taught me.
I'd say he was the guru of horsepower back in those days. You know, if you had a Waddell Wilson motor, you knew you had as much power as anybody out there had.
If I had to say people that I ever raced for that made horsepower, Ray Fox, Waddell Wilson, those were masters at getting tremendous horsepower. And yeah, I mean, when you cranked that race car up on race day, you were going to the front. Didn't always make it, didn't always finish the race, but boy, I'm gonna tell you one thing. While they were out there, they were a force.
Waddell and I fished together some, and most of the time he was in the boat rather than thinking about getting a strike from a smallmouth bass or a walleye or a trout. Most of the time he was thinking about how he could get 5 more horsepower for Daytona.
He was dedicated. He was dedicated. He was dedicated to the engine.
He's always been tagged a winner.
He was probably one of the best overall people that this sport has ever seen. He could do whatever needed to be done to make a race car a winning race car.
I hope that was made a lot of people enjoy their Sunday afternoons watching us race. And the thing that I'd like to remember is I was not a cheater. I tried to do it straight up, and I just thank God for the ability that he gave me.
Today, Waddell Wilson continues to consult with NASCAR Winston Cup teams and organizations. As a crew chief, Waddell earned 29 victories, but his contribution to the sport is more than numbers in the win column. Through his career, it was his genius in engine and car development that helped NASCAR technology evolve. With Men Behind the Wrenches, I'm Geoff Hammond, and thanks for joining us.